So I don't usually start videos in the kitchen, but I'm doing something a little different here, and I needed some of my wife's tools. I hope she doesn't watch these videos and see what I do during the day. Anyway, I boiled up a couple cups of water, and I did this 2 or 3 times, and I waited like an hour in between. So I poured that boiling water onto some slices of wood. These slices are about 1/8 of an inch thick each, maybe a little less. So I just put the hot water on there. I'm trying to soften the wood up, and like I said, I did this a couple times, and I just weighed them down with a couple of spoons. And after I left it in there for a while, I took those pieces out of the water. And I'm going to stick these in between the cuts that I put in the bowl blank. I just did that cut on the bandsaw. I made an arc and tried to make it even, and then stick those 3 pieces of wood in there to make a pattern. I thought this would be a cool idea. So with no glue or anything, I clamped these up as tight as I could get them, and I let it sit for a day. After a day, I took the clamps off, and my pieces of wood were bent. Not perfectly, but they were bent. I did get a crack in one of them, but I put that up so that when I turn the bowl, I turn the crack out. So once I had these pieces bent, I laminated them all together with a whole bunch of glue. I made sure that I was going to get plenty of squeeze out because I assumed that I was going to have some voids or something, and I figured that if I had tiny voids that the glue would kind of fill it up. So I put a whole bunch of glue on, rubbed it in with a little brush, made it nice and even, and I just stacked up all these pieces. I wasn't exactly sure how I was going to glue this and get it all together, but doing it this way worked fine. I just did one side, did the other side, and then I put the centerpiece in between them. And with the line facing up from the circle that I drew in there, I lined it up as close as I could so that it would come out even. Again, with a bunch of clamps and a lot of pressure. I squeeze these things till my hands hurt, trying to get it as tight and sealed up as I could. So I let that glue, I wiped off the excess here, and it all looked like it was sealed up pretty good. And I let that glue sit overnight again. And then getting ready for the lathe, I just drilled a 2 1/8 inch hole in here for the chuck to fit into. And you don't have to go deep on these holes. 1/4 of an inch tops, I think. So then I cut the excess off on the bandsaw, and having those little wings was nice. It gave me a handle as I was going around. And then I got my little chuck. I got it in expansion mode, and I just tightened it into that hole that I made. And you tighten both sides because you don't want it to fall off. Got it mounted up on the lathe. And I didn't leave a lot of the turning in here. So if you're looking for a video on how to turn a bowl, this isn't it. This is just ideas on how to make the bowls a little more interesting. This wood was all real dry, and I found that using the carbide tools was easier than the regular high-speed steel ones. I drilled this hole in here as a kind of a depth gauge so that I knew when I was at the bottom. I just kind of eyeballed up how deep I wanted to go, and I made a mark with a Sharpie, and I drilled into that line. And then as I'm hollowing it out, that'll tell me when to stop hollowing. So I hollowed this bowl out, and when I did that, I noticed that there were some bug holes, and I had one spot that delaminated. So I cleaned it up pretty close to where it was going to be finished. Here I'm using a 1-inch round nose scraper just to clean up the inside. And then the bug holes and the delamination part, I just cleared out the sawdust and whatever was in there that was loose. It wasn't solid wood, with a screwdriver and a pick. And I'll show you what I did with that. So on the bottom of this I put some tape so that the epoxy that I'm going to put in there didn't seep through and come out. So I just got a quick 5-minute 2-part epoxy, and I'm going to put in a little blue dye. And stir that up really good. I didn't need a lot because I don't have a lot of holes to fill, and I wasn't worried about making a mess because I'm going to put it back on the lathe like you'll see here in a minute. What I was most concerned about was that the epoxy was going to seep down and I would be left with a hole, so I really tried to pack the epoxy in there. I haven't done this too much, so I don't have a lot of experience filling these holes with this epoxy. So after that cured, I mounted it back on the lathe, and I used the round nose scraper again just to clean it all up, make it nice and smooth. And I got all that excess epoxy off, so it didn't make a big deal that I made a mess. And I sanded it all nice and smooth. I think I went up to about 220. And I flipped it over and I put it in the cold jaws to do the bottom piece and make a little bit of a foot. Very light cuts, so this is where I usually lose the piece. So I smoothed off all of that tenon, I guess. It's not a tenon, but the mortise maybe. And gave it a little bit of a foot around the edge. and I'm going to put some salad bowl finish on. I like to do 2 coats of this, and maybe a light sanding in between. Sometimes I get lazy and I don't do the sanding. But just liberally put it on there. There's a bug hole from the outside that I didn't fill with epoxy that I shoved that salad bowl finish into. If any of you have any better ideas on how I could have done this, please leave a comment in the comments so that I could try something different. This worked out okay, but I wasn't 100% satisfied with how I did it. So I'm just finishing this bowl up. I'm just wiping it down with a 600 grit. This is more like a sponge or a pad. After I put that salad bowl finish on. This bowl came out okay. I like the idea of it. What I don't like is the delamination that I had here that I filled in with that epoxy that I showed you. I didn't like that it delaminated, but these were kind of thicker pieces, and trying to bend them, even with boiling them in water and having them sit. Apparently I don't know how to do that. If I had a steam bender, I'm sure that would have worked a lot better, but I don't have that, so I just did best with what I could. I think the real thing to take away from this video is the patterns and stuff that you can put into a simple block of wood to give it a little more visual interest, a little more character. Just show a little bit more of your craftsmanship. The pattern is cool. Not my finest work. This will probably go on the discount table at the craft fairs. If anything, that was really the first time that I did the epoxy inlay. And it worked good. I mean, it's smooth, it's clean. It doesn't look bad, but it doesn't especially look good. Let me give it a close-up. So you can see how I have this delamination here, where I filled it in with the epoxy, and this piece over here, and this piece here, and I got a little bit more right there. But the pattern's cool, it came out cool, it came out even, and it gives the bowl a little more character than, this was just a test piece. So again, the real thing that you want to take away from this video is, that you can take a otherwise plain block of wood, cut a couple lines and glue some pieces in it, and it looks a lot cooler. Peace, I'm out of here. That's like going in the video, not even in the outtakes.